Hey, what's happening, everybody? My name is Haydn Adams with A Designer Who Codes. In today's tutorial, I want to talk about how I use the Gatsby Source-Buzzsprout plugin to build a CMS on my website. Here it is right here, A Designer Who Codes podcast. I also built a second website called podcast.designerwhocodes.com to pull all of the data from Buzzsprout into Gatsby. And I want to show you how I did that on my project. And with that, let's get started. All right, welcome back. So I'm building a brand new podcast. I am relatively new. I've done them in the past. I know what I was doing, and I used Podbean, which, full disclosure, I'm not being paid by Buzzsprout, Gatsby, Podbean, by anybody. This is my own journey through the podcast world using Gatsby. And Podbean was fine. I have nothing against what they offer, but I was looking for some sort of way to integrate the audio that I put on Buzzsprout into my website. So I have a website right here, adesignerwhocodes.com, and I wanted to bring in the information from Buzzsprout into my site. I didn't want to have to duplicate or reinvent the wheel. I was thinking, how can I create some way that the content is put in one place and pulled multiple places? And so I set up an account with Buzzsprout because after seeing that Gatsby does have the Gatsby source Buzzsprout, I went, well, this is really cool. I think this is going to work. And so what I did was I built my website, and here it is. I even went further than that, and I said, you know what? Let's then build a whole website around pulling information. And so I even built a subdomain called podcast. I can say that right. podcast.adesignerwhocodes.com. And this information pulls all the data, not just some of the data going in here. So let's take a look and see how I accomplished this, because it took a little bit of kind of ingenuity, a lot of error messages, and eventually a eureka moment once I figured out what's going on. So if we come back to the Gatsby Source Buzzsprout plugin in this area, it does say, of course, you have to install. If you've watched more of my videos, you know that I am a Yarn fan versus an NPM, but once again, they both work. I did set up the usage in the Gatsby config, the token and the podcast ID, and I thought, okay, I'm off to the races. So the great part about it is that it says query your podcast page query. And I'm like, cool. And all Buzzsprout podcast episodes. So I went, oh, cool. This is GraphQL. And if you're new to GraphQL, let's kind of walk it through. So I'm going to pull up GraphQL. And here we go. In the local host. So if we look at it, what Buzzsprout podcast episode, it has two different directories. All Buzzsprout podcast episode. That's pretty amazing that it's already built in. And if we go into our edges and we go into our node and we just say ID, it has two IDs. So I was like, well, this is pretty awesome. And then I went, well, it's going to basically have the artist and description and everything else I want. So I'm going to just pull the summary and we'll pull the title. We'll make it simple. So all of a sudden I went, well, this is getting better and better. That I said, well, wait a second. The ID shows up and the summary and the title. So basically it's pulling data from Buzzsprout. That's awesome. So what it also does is it pulls the audio URL. So the audio URL looks like this. Now, by default, I can't just play an MP3. And so what I had to do was I had to find an HTML5 audio player. So if we go and actually find, let me go, I think I actually have it pulled up already. The podcast piece, I found, if I can find the right area, I think this is in the podcast, that I did find, oh, it's in podcast stuff. I was frustrated, so I started naming things very poorly, and so I literally called a component podcast stuff. Yes, that's what you do, at least for me, when I was just frustrated why I couldn't get it to work. So if I go into podcast stuff, that is literally the best name I could think about, that I found a React H5 audio player. And if we go and do a quick little search for it, And here it is. It is an NPM. So what this little audio player does is it looks like this. And all you have to do, if you scroll down, where is this piece? Is using the source of this React H5 audio player, and I will put links to all of these down in the description below, so as an FYI. But under the source area for the string, all I did was that I pulled, now I'm getting lost, I'm in Safari on that page. All I did was I pulled the source right here. And it is HTTPS, so the great part about it is that it's still running all SSL secured, so no big deal. And I said, that's great. And what I did was, inside my site for this project, because I only wanted my latest episode to show up, so I just basically set inside of GraphQL, just limit to 1. So basically, on the actual site, adesignerwhocodes.com, I didn't want to give people so many episodes. I wanted to give them just 1 episode. And so I pulled the ID, the title, the audio URL, and the episode number. Yes, I could specify different ways, but this is how I did it. And so what I did was, down here, is that I used the edges map component to map out all of the episodes. This is just going to map out 1 because it's the latest one. And what it's going to do is that this episode number will be whatever the most current one is. And that's how I was able to pull the data out of all Buzzsprout podcast episode and limit it to 1. But I didn't stop there. I noticed something all of a sudden that caught my attention. And this is what took the full 6 hours of my day on Saturday. And I was like, okay, this is pretty awesome. So what I noticed when I was running through GraphQL, because my curiosity kind of got the best of me, that as I was looking in the all Buzzsprout podcast episode, they have a slug. And I went, they have a slug? And you're going, well, what's so big about a slug? Well, what a slug can do is a slug can pull individual podcast information out. So instead of mapping out this entire design, what I can do is I can create a blog or a website with slugs for individual pages. And so all what I did was I went, well, there's a slug. And then I went, well, I know how to pull slugs from blogs in the markdown remarks, but I wasn't quite sure how to pull a slug, and this is still, I'm relatively new in Gatsby, and I've never done this. So I said, well, I know what a slug is. I've built blogs before. I've built different pieces from markdown files, but how do I pull the slug from here and then utilize, if I scroll down this page, how I pull it into the Buzzsprout podcast episode? So this one is all of them, and this one is just one of them. But how do I leverage the slug? And so my 5-hour journey began, which of course, I ended up with the word podcast stuff, because I was frustrated and I'm like, there's gotta be a way. And so what I did was I said, well, this site's working. It's going great. I know I can use the React H5 audio player, which works fine. And so what I did was I decided to build a second site, because why not? I also know that this site works. So let's now work on a second site called podcast.adesignerwhocodes.com and build a blog or a website of sorts to see how it works. Let's take you through that page and show you how I actually built this site and leverage the power of slugs that come out of Buzzsprout. And also, in full disclosure, when I'm recording this, I've only done a little bit of design work. I haven't fully stylized it yet. My thing was that, can I get it to work? Can I just get the text to show up on the screen? And once I know the content is being pulled successfully, now I can go back and design it. This was just a simple slap of React Bootstrap on top of it. I have a default starter library that I use. That one basically leverages the Gatsby default starter, but it pulls all the design out and leaves me with just a boring basic design with React Bootstrap. So by the time you're watching this, I'm recording this in early May. This site may be a completely different design, but it'll still be up there. So if you want to take a look at the website, it is podcast help.adesignerwhocodes.com. So my first thing was I know how to do all podcasts or all Buzzsprout episodes. So if I go into a Designer Who Codes podcast, I use the same kind of piece using Gatsby. And in here, inside the source folder, if I go into pages, this is just my index page. Look at the index page inside of Visual Studio Code. Let me close a couple extra pages since I don't need those. Let's just make sure I don't get the wrong one. There it is, a Designer Who Codes podcast. So I use the same piece in the data all Buzzsprout episodes edges map. I just didn't set a limit. So I said show them all. And I also set a published at piece because my last podcast, I didn't put that in there. And I formatted it with the month, day, and year. Total plays, I didn't really use that one yet, but if I kind of brought it in for the fun of it, episode number. And what I also did was there's two worlds of information on Buzzsprout. And I thought, instead of having an excerpt like most websites do, on Buzzsprout, I utilized, you can use the episode description. And this is what I also noticed as well. Notice how they have bold, italics, links. I was going, this is probably going to be some cool markdown information. That's what I was kind of thinking in my head. I'm going, how would they build this episode description? And so I thought, well, this is my longer description right here. And as I scroll down in the more episode settings, there's a summary, which is just a field. And said, wait a second, I think this is what I think it's going to be. So a summary is like my excerpt, and my description is like the body of a blog. And sure enough, when I double checked this, when I looked at both the summary and description, sure enough, the description had p tags, had a break tag, which I'm not quite sure. I think I just hit the return key twice and it was, well, it is what it is. It's not perfect, but I'll go with it. But what it also did was, if we go down into the HTML piece, it also had href, a tag, and had a break tag, whatever, in here, which meant, you know what? This looks like Markdown. And so what I'm thinking is I could pull this data out of the description for the actual blog article, but use the summary on the actual homepage. And so what I did was, on my GraphQL information, the actual index page just pulls the summary and pulls the slug. And what the slug does is it says link to slug. Now you can always write a different construct or a constant at the very top. I'm just pulling data because this is how my brain works. I start with the word data and just follow the rabbit hole down. So I had to say data, all Buzzsprout podcast episode, edges. I'm going to map the nodes. No, let's not do that. And then all the nodes basically are right here. So edges, node, and then slug. Inside of the Gatsby node, I said, okay, let's create pages. And I want to pull pages off of the slug. Oop, I think I should be back one. There we go. But I said query all Buzzsprout podcast episode edges, node, slug. And then I said for each slug, use the template podcast episode. So this page took about 6 hours to work, and really because I left off an S. That was my error. I am going to have a future podcast on this as well because I had to laugh at myself. I think I spent 2 hours trying to figure out why this top part was working, but this bottom part wasn't. And it created all the pages. That was great. It created the pages successfully. I went to the Error 404 page. It listed the pages. It was fantastic. But this bottom part wasn't working. And I realized that I had the word edge like this and like this. And what was happening was it wasn't pulling the edges. Literally an S got me tripped up. That's how crazy it was. But what I did was I pulled the pieces of the slug. And so all of a sudden, now I could leverage the power of the slugs coming out of all Buzzsprout podcast episode. So if we go full circle, if we go into our source folder and templates, I have a podcast episode. And so in here, what I did was I said, okay, podcast is going to be data.buzzsprout podcast episode. So shorten the URL to say podcast everywhere down below. Otherwise, I have to write data.podcast episode title and so forth and so forth. And what I did was down below here, I said, pull the data from that markdown, even though it's break tags, it's still there. And I said podcast at the very top dot description. That's the secret sauce to creating that page. And so I pulled slug, title, description, audio URL, and episode number, and using strings inside of the GraphQL and saying the slug is equal to the string that is pulled from prior, what I got was a website where now I got to take out the word hi people. That's the leftovers from the Gatsby template. But now when I click on episode 1, HTML is not a design language. And if I play it, I'm not pulling audio from my system, so you can't hear that. But if I change my settings down the road, I could. But now this player works. And the great part about it is, because I used one, an HTML5 audio player, and two, everything is built based upon the React Bootstrap, if I inspect this page and then go to a mobile version, I still got to fix the header, I know that. But this player works on an Android, on an iPhone, and notice how the URLs showed up down below, and they work. They turn blue. So if I were to go out of it for a second, notice how the links are already working based upon pulling the description. And there is some information you can click on right here. That's really awesome. This to me was like, oh my gosh, this actually works. And it did take me all day. And what I like about this HTML5 audio player, this H5 piece, was it actually has edits that you can go into and even design different areas. So you can build an audio player based upon different feeds in your information. So there are ways to design and even work on this even further in this piece to go even farther of how to design for it. So it's really cool how you can even leverage different design pieces in the HTML5 arena and pull your audio areas. And I think, was it right here? I don't know if this is the page I'm looking for. Here it is. Nope, that's not it. But what it does is you can go in and just set up your audio player and pulling the audio out. And so there were some variations I did find on a page that I cannot find anymore. I have it bookmarked somewhere. I'm trying to figure out. It wasn't the release notes. I'll have to figure out where it's somewhere. But basically, I was able to design a minified version where it just has it all in one line. And so it just scales because it's all just SVGs and divs and flex boxes and nothing more than that. So someone can utilize this within a mobile framework. The next steps I have to do, of course, is add my different buttons to both Spotify, iTunes, and Google. I do have TuneIn as well on this one. So if you are an Alexa fan, you can also use that. I'm just going to link the big three up on this website. So if you are watching this video in the future, you might see different variations to the design. But that's how I did it. There was nothing crazy of how I did it. The slug got me interested, and I broke it about 3 or 4 times because it doesn't show the slug on the actual website. But when you utilize the same thing as a slug, when it comes to blogs and markdown files, you can use the slug in the same way to leverage Buzzsprout. And now I'm a sold convert when it comes to Buzzsprout because I can pull data from this. And the last thing I wanted to show you also was, where is the website? So by default, they do give you a website. Mine is a designerwhocodes.buzzsprout.com. That's fine. What I did was I said hide from search engines, because what I eventually want is I want a Designer Who Codes podcast to be found by search engines and not this one. So their site, which I imagine they probably have, is a rel no follow. If we find the rel, where is that no follow? It's somewhere in here. No follow. Is it no follow? Anyways, Regardless of the fact is that they put code, I went too far on that one, but they said hide my public Buzzsprout website. So I said, you know what? I don't want this one. I want my own site. And this is how I leveraged the Gatsby Source-Buzzsprout plugin, which to me, the heart just rocks because I am totally a fan of these two sites working together. And whoever built this, if you know them, give me a huge kudos to them because this is awesome. Hopefully you've learned something. If you're curious about podcasting and Buzzsprout, if you've thought that this has given you some helpful information, leave me a comment. I'd love to hear if you've utilized this plugin or if this is a brand new piece for you. If you like this channel, give it a thumbs up on this page. Give me a subscribe because I got more videos coming along the way. But this is how I built my website using the content in Buzzsprout through Gatsby. I'm passionate about teaching designers how to become better web designers by learning how to code. And my first two courses are up on my website at courses.adesignerwhocodes. These two are all about Gatsby. If you're brand new and you've watched these Gatsby websites, you're thinking, I want to learn how to use Gatsby. Well, this course is for you. How to set up, build, and deploy your first Gatsby website will take you from start to finish on building your first website. If you want to take it a step further, then how to build a blog in Gatsby JS goes through not just the beginner, but more the intermediate usages of Gatsby. So if you are looking to better your web skills, I encourage you to take a look at these courses, sign up, and become a better web designer by learning how to code in these first two courses about Gatsby JS. Once again, I'm Haydn Adams with A Designer Who Codes.